Awesome. You decided to do something about Windows Server 2003 and to support. Before you get started, we have some great tips that are going to make this whole process so much easier. In this video, part 3 of our End to Support guide, we're going to cover migration best practices and show you how to leverage your solution provider to the fullest extent. The good ones are going to make your migration more affordable and much less of a headache. Maybe the most important segment is the one where we get to actually execute on the do something plan, right? Okay. So a few important things, right? Microsoft has an opinion on the appropriate methodology to approach this problem. I think it's reasonable to use that as sort of a framework or a guideline.
Absolutely.
Just in case things kind of blow up and you need to call Microsoft, we want to make sure that when Microsoft asks questions about how we approach the problem, that at least the reason won't be that we didn't do it the Microsoft way.
Right, we've done it according to best practice standards.
Can you give us a little color, explain, the specifics of maybe the approach from plan to execute?
It's the same kind of methodology for really any services engagement. It's the same methodology that we employ for any services engagement that we enter into. It's your design and your build and your deploy, right? So the design phase is going to be essentially assessing your environment, taking inventory, understanding where you're at now, because it's impossible to get where you're going if you have no idea where you're at. Right.
So the first part of design then is planning, right? I mean, after we get a general assessment and we figure out where we are, using your words, we need to develop a plan, right?
Absolutely.
Give me some of the components of appropriate planning in this scenario.
Well, so again, we want to make sure that we have that we understand the environment, right? And that we have everything well documented, including our workflows, including the applications in use, that we've assigned weights to these applications, and that we understand what their dependencies and requirements are. And then, of course, really before we make a decision about what approach or option we're going to take, we need to go through and calculate the risks and the total cost of each actionable item. And ultimately determine what is going to make the most sense, not only technologically, but also financially for the organization, based upon what initiatives we're looking at.
So it's all in the planning. We took a look at our environment. We took an inventory. We've identified some dependencies. Probably one of the most elusive problems that we run into, right, is dependencies really require a lot more focus. That's where we find a lot of mistakes in the assessment piece, is that we don't realize how this port over here has any impact on that compute platform, thereby affecting that application. Absolutely. That was sensitive to throughput, unlike any of the other applications. And so we can go through all of this, and it doesn't really matter, but all of a sudden, if we take our physical 2003 server and spin it up into a virtual machine and throw it over here and put this VNIC in front of it and try to point it over at the storage, and it doesn't act exactly the same way it did when it was physical.
Absolutely.
Shocker, right? So a lot of planning requires that, right? So should we do some proof of concept?
I think that any organization would be remiss to not thoroughly test the objectives that they plan on implementing, to see, doing to your point, a proof of concept or a pilot, to see, is this option a logistically viable option for us? And a lot of that is done at the application layer, right? And then a lot of that is done, subsequently testing whatever changes we've implemented. But I think that it's absolutely paramount to make sure that you are, as I used to say when I was a carpenter, measuring twice and cutting once.
And that's a good point, right? So probably one of the reasons why we've been so successful in our engagements with our customers is because we rarely ever offer any solutions without measurement. And measurement is just a simple word for a little bit of assessment on the situation that we're getting ourselves into. I don't know how many times we've run into folks that kind of guess a little bit on how much performance they need and then maybe invest and overbuild so that it works. In this case, there's going to be a lot more variables. So one of the things we talked about on the earlier segment was the fact that I may have some old infrastructure that I'm going to have to upgrade to some new infrastructure. So we really are going to want to make sure that a part of that planning is not just the investment that we need to make in the new infrastructure, or what that infrastructure might look like, because it's certainly going to change. And to assume that that's not going to have an impact on things is kind of a big mistake, right? And the number one obstacle and objective and enabler, and the most important part, is the investment capital for this, right? Sure. And that's an important part of the planning, right, Kevin? I mean, for us to figure out what the expense of this is a major piece on the path that we take. Whether it's a phased approach or what we call big bang approach, where we just do it all at once. But it requires a great deal of thought that understands the financial posture, that a customer is in. And it's probably one of the most important parts of the relationship you can have with a VAR. A good question to ask your VAR is, do you understand me? Do you understand my financial situation?
Absolutely.
So that you don't come to me with a $400,000 all-flash array and maybe 2 racks of servers when I didn't need them. We're not guessing on this, right? The other part that's important too is understanding that until July, when this thing falls down, there's a lot of vendors out there that are offering promotions that have measurable impact on the total capital expense for some of these projects. And I think that a lot of customers to this day fail to ask about that. And I think one of the most valuable things that any of our viewers can take from this is that every vendor does offer promotions. A good vendor, a good VAR that offers several vendors, has probably already done the research for you.
Absolutely, and they're actually going to be able to leverage those partnerships to see if they can't maybe introduce some healthy competition into the opportunity and help drive those costs for the end user down. And while we're talking about cost, it's another, the do nothing plan, right, has an associated cost with it.
It's cheap at first.
Absolutely, it's got one of the pros, and it's not cheap, it's inexpensive. Or least expensive.
I think
right?
it's cheap.
That's arguable
do
too. That's
anything.
debatable, right? But ultimately, there is one of the pros of that do nothing approach is going to be that you have the lowest introductory cost and probably ultimately the lowest introductory risk as well, right? But you've got that total cost of ownership. You've got that maintaining those deprecated skill sets, maintaining the old hardware. Support for hardware costs are going to continue to increase each year as the hardware gets older and more likely to fail. So the do nothing approach definitely does have some substantiated costs associated with them.
Yes.
They're just far more difficult to quantify because there are so many unknown variables there.
So let's just be propeller heads about it and ignore it until it goes away, right?
That's one way to do it.
So that's, I think, really the important piece, to kind of circle back on that and understanding, the value that you expect from your VAR. If your VAR is a website and it's the lowest price, you're not getting all the value out of your reseller. And I think that that's really important, especially when you come to a juncture where you don't know what you don't know.
Sure.
Guys like you and I, we may turn less screws than a lot of these guys nowadays, but we design these things, several of them per day, weeks and weeks and months and years on end. There's very few scenarios we haven't run into that we haven't heard of before, although we still run into those once in a while. Evaluating and understanding your vendors and the ecosystem that exists there, understanding that there are promotions out there. HP has probably the strongest program out there to help with the 2003 migration strategy.
For the server and compute.
It's very
yeah.
compelling. I mean, sometimes it's 2, 3, even 4 points off. You couple that with a Vology deal where we're working in partnership, where we're leveraging our relationship with HP, and you can end up with substantial savings on your server infrastructure purchase. We have options for financing. These are all things that we're able to put together so that the wrong part of why you're not doing anything isn't the reason why, right? And it shouldn't be because I just don't have any money or I just think that it's going to cost too much. Because to your point, how much is it going to cost you in a year from now when you have no security fixes?
Right.
Maybe you're HIPAA compliant. Maybe you get a letter in the mail that says, hey, by the way, you're out of compliance, right? So it's really important that you leverage your value-added reseller. Otherwise, you should be called a reseller.
Any VAR worth patronizing, worth spending your IT budget on
Is all over you on this.
They're going to have the engineering staff, the architecture staff. These people are going to be doing this day in and day out, and they'll be able to help you in the areas that you may be bandwidth restricted or resource restricted, whatever the case may be.
And even more importantly, you're going to have to invest in some hardware. And a good VAR is going to understand all the promotions and programs that exist. There's a million of them. Yep. We did it, right? We looked at it. Right now, HP is the best way to go when it comes to the promotions and programs. Just investing in Gen 9 on a ProLiant platform, maybe you didn't need Gen 9 right now. Maybe you need it next year. But the program is strong, and it helps us get moved over from one place to another. And there are many programs out there. HP kind of sticks out there for us, and we're big fans of the server platform. But if you're not leveraging that, if you're not asking your salesperson or your solutions architect or your sales engineer about programs, then you're missing out on value. There is literally money sitting on the table for that. If it's a good VAR, they've already done the research. They know where the best programs are. Maybe they're aligning those vendors up. Maybe they're even shooting a video about it.
When you go to your accountant, there's a reasonable expectation that he's going to know where all the money's at, or she, that individual will know where all the money's at, right?
Sure.
Where it's hidden, whatever, what loopholes to leverage and this and that. It's the same with your VAR.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? So that's Windows Server 2003 into support in a nutshell. If you're interested in continuing this discussion or working with Vology on your migration, you've got several ways to contact us. Jump into a live chat, fill out a request for consultation, or just give us a call. We're a full-service solutions provider with extensive engineering resources and strong partnerships with the world's largest technology providers. We'd love to help you out.